Greetings everyone, this is going to be a post-Porkfest video. I did one last year, and I think many of my generic Porkfest thoughts are not going to be really that much different. There were some specific things that were particularly interesting at this Porkfest that I want to relay, especially a debate of Chicago School versus Austrian School between David Friedman and Bob Murphy, and also a series of lectures from Michael Huemer, who is the author of what I now consider probably the very best book that is purely about libertarian political theory. Not necessarily the best book in economics or history, because it's not that at all, but a book that if I were to read you, the one reason I might read you my best libertarian book videos is because of his book. So let me just start by saying I just got back from Porkfest. I had a really good time. A very interesting phenomenon that's kind of more general than libertarianism is the chance to meet people who you've known online for a long time but never really interacted with. Same thing happened last year when I went to Porkfest. I met Legal Immigrant. I got to meet him again this year, and of course it's like, we're old friends, although we really have only met on 2 occasions. I also got to meet the Sauce, a YouTuber who we've watched each other for a long time. It was very interesting the first time I saw him. Obviously we recognized each other, and we embraced, and then he's like, "What is your name?" It's very interesting when you feel like you know somebody, and then you don't even know what each other's names are. I got to meet Katie Oteka, a longtime subscriber of mine, so that was very enjoyable. And also a couple other people recognized me, came up and said hi, and one person actually came up and said that he went to Porkfest based on my recommendation of the previous Porkfest, because in that recommendation I was not just a sycophant. I explained some of the problems I had with Porkfest, and he thought, well, it must be legit. This guy isn't just lying. I was very happy to meet him. I don't know his YouTuber name, but I know his real name. The other thing, in a more libertarian sense, it is very, very good to meet people with whom you agree. The difference is when you normally meet people, if you get in political conversations, you start explaining the history of the Fed. You start debating whether roads could be created in the free market. What are we going to do about children? What are we going to do about corporations? And here, all those debates, you don't have those debates. You have very interesting discussions about even more elaborate topics, but those debates become jokes, in-jokes. Who will be the roads is like an in-joke at Porkfest, not a debate you have to have. The history of the Fed is not something you have to go over with everybody, at least most people. The vast majority of people, I'd say. So it is an enormous intellectual shift from your normal life, and it's very healthy, I think, psychologically, to meet people with whom you agree. Now, it's not necessary to go to Porkfest to do this, and I highly encourage people, if it is all possible, to reach out to and to socialize with people with whom you agree politically. I think the best ways to do this in the United States is to look up any group that's affiliated with Ron Paul, so Ron Paul meetup groups, Young Americans for Liberty, or Campaign for Liberty. Fortunately, those groups are widespread enough that you are likely, if you live in any place that's relatively decently populated, to meet them. I live in a small town with about 10,000 people, and easily can meet 20 anarcho-capitalists, thanks to Young Americans for Liberty. So that's very interesting. Now, there's the side discussions you have with these people are always very fascinating. You have people coming from all over the world and all over the country, and so you can compare and contrast this or that society. There's a large contingent of people from New York City. I always call them the New York clique. They call themselves Hapa Hour, or something near to that anyway. So that was very enjoyable. Of course, I got a little sunburned. It's a very interesting dynamic where there are these, when you describe what happens at Porkfest, people, it either sounds like a lecture series, like some kind of summer school, and or just a party, and it really has the atmosphere of both. You have lectures that vary in their intellectual depth. Some of them are pretty lighthearted. I mean, there was one on the coming singularity put on by one of the New York clique members, a gentleman by the name of Perry Metzger. There were all kinds of debates about, or discussions about, raising your own pigs, raising your own food, so it's kind of survivalist. On the other hand, there was the Austrian versus Chicago debate, which I thought was very good. There was comparative laws in different societies, another lecture given by David Friedman. At the end, there was a whole bunch of anecdotal stories given about the life of Murray Rothbard by 3 gentlemen who knew him. Let's see, Yuri Maltsev, Joe Salerno, and who is the head of the president of the Mises Institute, the former head. Forget his name. Doug French. Doug French, yeah. So that was interesting. The other thing is, Porkfest is literally like an actual um, libertarian wet dream, on a small scale, not for the whole society, but the presence and use of firearms is widespread. Open carry, not only of knives, but also of handguns and rifles, is quite common. In fact, there's a woman walking around wearing a pink dress, shouldering an AR-15. Lots of people shouldering AR-15s. There was a Muslim. There's a voluntarist Muslim, including a converted white man, and then also actual like ethnic Arabs, wearing AK-47s. And like in one scene, it's so surreal to say this. David Friedman, a secular Jew, standing there having a cordial conversation with an Arab with an AK-47 strapped over the front of him. Just having a discussion about Friedman's fiction. It's literally stuff that you would dream about, how bizarre some of it is. Obviously, buying and selling of drugs and liquor. Child labor. I was sold a pin by a girl who was maybe 9, who said she was working for, quote, some guy. Obviously, food vendors without any kind of licensure. No taxes are paid. I bought and sold a little gold. Silver for sale. There wasn't very much gold for sale, which was disappointing. I was talking to a guy, and he was kind of lamenting. I had brought mine with me, and we were able to come to an equitable agreement between the two of us. Obviously, books, survival equipment, although not tons. The event's not big enough to have a huge market, and there was an interesting kind of lower order goods like food, and then higher level goods like guns and Bitcoin. I talked to the Bitcoin guys again. This is about half the same people who were there last year. And whatever we can say about Bitcoin, here's the perspective. I bought all my Bitcoins at Porkfest last year. I paid $100, and at the time they were like $6 or $7 a Bitcoin. Bitcoins are now what? I don't know, but they've been over 250, but now they're in the $170, $150 range. That means it is in excess of 1,500% increase in 1 year on my investment. That is insane. It is very up and down, something they readily admit, but the the trend is very much up. Someone asked me, when a family member asked, what did you actually learn there that was any useful? I said, I made an investment that I've made over 1,500% on. And I think Bitcoins, for whatever weird things about them, I'm not saying to put all your money into them, it's something that I think is potentially very valuable, and I don't know of anyone who could point to something else that they've done that would be even close to that. So that was very interesting, and the whole atmosphere is quite interesting. There's no violence, there's no accidental shootings or anything like that. One thing I will also say is you get a lot of exposure to left libertarians. I don't know what those people's deal is. They're pretty annoying. I said this in the last video. I think what we have here is a case where people who are sincere communists and left-wing socialists have sort of consciously lost the debate in terms of capitalism and free markets, and so they have nominally, kind of agreed, but then they want everyone to still kind of live in the no hierarchy, communal everything, and that's just stupid. That doesn't make any sense. People have a high enough time preference that they're not willing to become the capitalist, so to speak, which is what they're essentially advocating. When they advocate a worker-owned factory where everyone's equal, the only way you can have it be everyone equal is everyone has to be an investor. Otherwise, there's no incentive to invest in the first place. And very few people, and this is not a slight to them, this would include me, are willing to make a huge investment first and then maybe eventually get remuneration for that. So they're kind of a walking joke. All the cliches, dirty hippie, thieving. I mean, they had a whole bunch of tents and they were all overcrowded. None of them owned them, and they weren't really being maintained very well. But they weren't hurting anyone, so whatever. Now, the two main intellectual things that I took away from this was, one, there were 2 lectures given by Michael Huemer, and he is the author of The Problem of Political Authority. I did actually record a full review of this book, but I haven't uploaded it because I did it when I was at work. This is basically a must-read. I would consider this probably the single best book on libertarian political authority that I've ever read. Certainly as good or better than For New Liberty by Mary Rothbard. And just to go very briefly, Huemer has a very interesting critique of the way libertarians argue. Let's just say there's two hypothetical arguments that lead to anarcho-capitalism. One is based on premises that most people generally accept, and the second one, B, is, well, A is based on ones that people generally accept, premises people generally accept, and B is based on premises that most people don't accept. Which line of argumentation is better in terms of practically effectiveness, in terms of convincing people? It would be A, because to convince them via the argumentation of B, they don't agree with the precepts, and so you have to first convince them of the precepts. And depending on what they are, that can or cannot be very difficult. However, A is reliant on things that they already agree. So his example, and he talks about a couple different ones, not just one of them, but the idea of natural rights. Some libertarians, especially the Rothbardians, have a very absolutist view towards natural rights, and that the idea being you can't infringe on the rights of anybody no matter what. So even if killing one person would, save the world, many Rothbardians would say, no, you can't do that. Well, most people do not have that absolutist view of rights. They think that if the disadvantages or the advantages are strong enough, rights violations are okay. A less extreme example would be you're starving in the woods, you're going to die, you come across a vacant cabin, it's locked, but it's full of food. Can you break in and feed yourself? There are many libertarians who say, no, you can't. Most people in the world would say, yes, you can. Now, if you're going to convince people of libertarianism based on an absolutist view of rights, before you can even get to the actual arguments, you have to convince them of that. That takes a lot more lead work, and also it's very likely to paint yourself as an extremist, which is going to paint the philosophy you're trying to justify as extremist. Huemer advocates what he calls the quote-unquote common sense approach. I'm not going to break it all down, but very simply, even making exceptions for general violations of property rights in certain conditions, the authority of the state is not assumed. It does not logically follow from that. Even if we say rights violations are okay in certain circumstances, it doesn't mean that taxation is necessarily justified or that the current system that we have is justified. Huemer fleshes it out in a great deal more detail than I'm going to do in this video, but very persuasively. One sec.